Okay, now it seems to be cooperating. How nice of it. All right, well, it's cooperating, we hope. Let's go ahead and now it seems don't need to hear myself. Let's go ahead and get our text to share. Okay, just give it another minute since YouTube was a little bit difficult today, and we'll get that finalized. The text is up. Give a second for people to log in. As always, the usual reminders that if you'd like to join by Zoom, you're welcome to join by Zoom. If you have a question or comment, please feel free, if you're on Zoom, to either raise your hand, unmute, or put it in chat. And if you're on YouTube, put it in chat. But of course, there will be a time delay because YouTube always has a buffer between when I say something and when it actually appears. But without any further ado, we are going to jump into our continuation of the Talmud here in Brachot. We have been discussing, as is the entire course, about suffering, but in particular, in the last few sections, we were dealing with the painful idea of sufferings of love, Yisurim Ahava, and whether or not certain incidents would be beyond the concept of suffering and love, sufferings of love. We talked about that this was sort of predicated on the idea that for every bad thing that we do that we have not repented for and dealt with, there will be punishment. And for every good thing we do, which we have not been rewarded for, there will eventually be a reward. And therefore, if we are suffering, well, that's punishment without cause, and therefore there will have to be a reward that is commensurate to balance that out eventually. And the general idea that this was something to look forward to in Olam Haba, in the world to come, that there would be greater reward for those who bore up under the suffering in this world. Now, we are going to eventually come back to some much more in-depth discussion, stories and techniques for how do we cope during suffering. But before we get to that, we have two main sections in this part of the Talmud that we have to go through. One of them are the anecdotes in the Talmud, specifically on this topic. And then the second is a more lengthy attempt to come up with a formula for exactly how this works. So we're going to do the anecdotes today, and we might be able to begin the formulas. It depends on how far we get. So let's begin with anecdote number one. The Gemara continues to address the issue of suffering and affliction. Rabbi Yochanan's student, Rabbi Chia bar Abba, fell ill. So, student is ill. Remember, this is an adult student. Rabbi Yochanan goes to visit him, because that is a mitzvah. Bikur Cholim, the mitzvah of visiting the ill, is incredibly important, and something we'll talk about in much more detail when we talk about our techniques and our strategies and the mitzvot, the commandments, regarding how we alleviate suffering. But let's see what happens in this incident. Rabbi Yochanan entered to visit him and said to him, "Is your suffering dear to you?" All right, not exactly modern bedside technique, but understand what Rabbi Yochanan is trying to say. He is asking him, look, you're suffering, you're ill, you're sick. Now, for some people, they might feel that this is entirely worthwhile. Meaning that we saw in the beginning that it could be a salt, it could be that enhancement to my reflection, and therefore it is welcome. Or it could be that this is something that I have gone through my calculation and realized is Yisurim Ahava. It's not punishment, and it's not because of dereliction, and it's not so severe as to delay me from study or from prayer. So therefore, I will willingly accept it because there is reward that will come with it. But note what Rabbi Yochanan is not saying when he comes to visit him. He is not saying, what did you do to deserve this? He is not saying, repent, sinner. Instead, he is asking, how have you analyzed what is happening to you? And what does it mean to you? Because depending upon what it means to you, I will respond differently. And he is giving Rabbi Chia bar Abba the power to to self-reflect and to make that decision on his own. This is incredibly important and something that even if we're not one of the great rabbis of old able to do what they are about to do, is still an important consideration whenever we are coming to somebody who is in the midst of suffering, whether they are ill, whether they've lost a job, whether they've gone through a painful relationship. We allow them to tell us how it feels to them. And we can then offer advice, support, or just our presence after they have made that determination. Now, if we feel that their determination is incredibly harmful to themselves or others, then of course we can try to persuade them to look at it differently. But we always allow them to begin that process, because that will let us know where they are and let us know what approach will be best to assist them. And as always, we do not start with blame. So he asks him, is the suffering dear to you? Rabbi Chia said to him, I welcome neither the suffering nor its reward. All right, critical, amazing statement. Remember, we've just been going through a few pages of our PDF here of talking about the reward that can come from suffering, the benefit that can come from suffering. And it is clear that when the rubber hits the road, Rabbi Chia does not want to suffer. It's fine to speak theoretically about suffering as being a potential boon, a potential aid, but when rubber hits the road, most people are going to say, I don't want to suffer, and that's okay. Judaism is saying, here is a great rabbi that is saying, I think my suffering is bad. I would like my suffering to stop. I would like to feel better, and that we are supposed to understand and welcome that attitude in Judaism, and not say, no, bear up under the pain, be like Job. Remember Job, who only suffered in a quietish way in the first couple chapters. No, this is instead telling us that welcoming the end of our suffering is absolutely normal and perfectly healthy, and even at the expense of the reward. That we can talk about the reward in the world to come, olam haba, you will be paid back handsomely, etc., but given a choice to end the suffering or not, most of us will choose to end the suffering. And that is exactly what happens. Rabbi Yochanan said to him, give me your hand. Rabbi Chia bar Abba gave him his hand, and Rabbi Yochanan stood him up and restored him to health. So this is a sort of a symbolic element of healing, and Rabbi Yochanan is there to help restore him to health. He is not going to let him languish when he wants to be free of this suffering. Instead, he will return him to health, which means he's losing the reward, but that is not the problem. We have the right to choose, when we have a choice, whether we want reward at some indefinite time in the future or whether we want the suffering we have now. We are allowed to determine whether this is too bad for myself. You can't tell me, buck up, little buckaroo, you can get through this, just keep going. If I tell you I can't handle it, I can't handle it. And all the promises of reward are probably not going to help me if I have a choice. We're going to come back many, many lessons from now to talk about when we don't have choices. But here we are dealing where there is somebody like Rabbi Yochanan that could help him get healed, and therefore he has an immediate choice, and he wants out. He wants this illness to go. And Rabbi Yochanan agrees. He immediately helps him to get better. Episode number 2 is very, very similar, but with an especially important coda at the end. Similarly, Rabbi Yochanan fell ill. All right, now this is Rabbi Yochanan, who was the star of the first healing. He was the one who came to help him, and now he himself is sick. So we've already learned 2 important things here. One is that great rabbis can get sick, that this is not something that only happens to the bad people, that this is something that can happen to people that are perfectly righteous and good and noble and learned and scholarly and all the other possible adjectives we want to pile on them. They get sick, and that's a normal thing that would happen. This is not an exception. And 2, we also learn that when somebody is sick, we go to them with compassion and kindness. As we see here, Rabbi Hanina, another one of the rabbis of the age, entered to visit him and said to him, is your suffering dear to you? Same question that Rabbi Yochanan had asked his disciple. And Rabbi Yochanan said to him, I welcome neither the suffering nor its reward. Same answer. Now, again, why are we getting two of these stories? Well, there is an important second level to this. We'll get in a couple more sentences. But first of all, we needed two of these stories to remind us that it's okay for everyone to say this. It wasn't just that Rabbi Chia bar Abba was weak, or that he was lacking in faith, or that he, wasn't properly valuing the reward that might come to him. This is a perfectly normal response that Rabbi Yochanan would also agree that neither the suffering nor the reward are dear to him. And so we shouldn't be surprised that the next line tells us, Rabbi Chanina said to him, give me your hand. He gave him his hand, and Rabbi Chanina stood him up. So again, here we have Rabbi Chanina healing Rabbi Yochanan, which leads to the immediate question that the Gemara asks, why? Let Rabbi Yochanan stand himself up. Meaning, wait, in the paragraph before, Rabbi Yochanan was the one doing the healing. And now Rabbi Yochanan needs someone else to heal him. I mean, physician, heal thyself. I think that it should be an idiom. I mean, why couldn't Rabbi Yochanan just do whatever he did for Rabbi Chia to himself, and then he could be fine? They say, meaning this is a common aphorism, a prisoner cannot free himself from prison. Now, like all such aphorisms, this doesn't mean it's always meant to be literally true. Certainly, something like the Shawshank Redemption, the prisoner got out by himself. But what this is trying to say is that when you are spiritually trapped, when you are psychologically trapped, we often need somebody else to help break us out, to help us become free from that prison that we find ourselves trapped in. And that therefore Rabbi Yochanan was not in a position to help himself. This is also incredibly important because it reminds us that each of us may find it difficult to always help ourselves in our own troubles, but we can often be the key to helping someone else in their troubles. We don't have to wait until we're perfect, wait until we're never ill, never having a problem, always have our life in perfect working order before we help someone else. We can help someone else even if we also need help. And that mutuality is central, it's critical. There is also another element to this. In both of these incidents, where the opening statement, are these dear to you, is met with neither it, meaning the suffering, nor its reward. And we have to ask, well, is the suffering dear? I mean, I get the idea that the reward might be important, that the person is cherishing the reward, but are there people who sometimes just welcome the suffering, not for the reward, but just the suffering itself? Well, the short answer is yes. It's complicated, of course. There are different reasons for people to become attached to the suffering. For some, it becomes their way of self-identity, and the idea of alleviating their suffering completely would leave them confused about who they are, because they have become in their mind their illness. And we have to work very gently with them to help them realize that their humanity, their nobility extends far beyond the particular troubles or suffering that they are enduring. Indeed, many people will identify their own strength purely on the basis of their ability to tolerate the bad, the suffering that they are going through. And if the suffering ends, then how will they know they are strong? What will be their claim to fame? How will they show their strength, if not through their suffering? And so they can become attached to the suffering even without a reward in mind. And then there are others where it is not a question of being dear to them. It simply has become normal to them. It's almost becomes like a companion to them. And as well, we need to work gently to help them realize that there are better forms of accompaniment in this world than whatever we might be suffering from. Now, those two incidents would be enough for most authors. But of course, our tradition has multiple authors. The Talmud was written over centuries by many, many different rabbis. And so we are going to get a third incident of the same type, but with a very different twist. The Gemara relates that Rabbi Elazar, that was another of Rabbi Yochanan's students, fell ill. Rabbi Yochanan entered to visit him and saw he was lying in a dark room. All right, so Rabbi Yochanan comes to visit the student, doing what he should, and he finds that Rabbi Elazar is not only ill, but he is in a dark room, that he is closed himself off. Now, we're going to try and identify the illness that Rabbi Elazar has by the end of the story, but just keep this in mind because the next sentence is going to be hard to understand. Rabbi Yochanan exposed his arm, and light radiated from his flesh filled the house. All right, probably going, what are you talking about? So Rabbi Yochanan was considered to be the most beautiful person in his generation. He was a stunning example of human physical perfection. And as such, he could simply roll up his sleeve and the glow from his gorgeousness would be enough to lighten the entire house. This is somebody that had perfect skin, you might say. Now, that's that hyperbole, almost certainly. But the idea that this is how beautiful Rabbi Yochanan is very important to the story as we go forward. He saw that Rabbi Elazar was crying. All right, now, he could be crying from a normal physical illness. Many of the intestinal problems of the ancient world, many of the skeletal and muscular problems come with crippling pain. And there were many reasons for a person to cry. But again, we're going to have to tease this out. And indeed, that is what Rabbi Yochanan is going to try to do. He is going to try to unpack why Rabbi Elazar is crying. Again, because if you don't know why, then how can you help? But the technique is, well, we'll see. Why are you crying? If, going into typical rabbi mode, Rabbi Yochanan begins to offer potential reasons why Rabbi Elazar might be crying, but is then ruling them out on Rabbi Elazar's behalf. As we know from before, especially during the time of Job, that is not a great strategy, and it is going to kind of lead to an unusual conclusion. If you're crying because you did not study much Torah, meaning, do you think you're so ill, you're going to die, and you're regretting all the time that you didn't spend studying Torah? Well, we learned one who brings a substantial sacrifice and one who brings a meager one have equal merit, as long as he directs his heart towards heaven. So don't worry about how much you've actually studied. As long as you were doing it with the proper intention, then your time, your effort will be equivalent to somebody that studied 24/7. It's not about the quantity, it's about the quality of your passion. So you shouldn't be crying for that. If you're crying because you lack sustenance, as Rabbi Elazar was quite poor in the Talmudic tales, not every person merits to eat off two tables. This was an idiom of the time, meaning one table full of wealth and one table full of Torah. And Rabbi Elazar was certainly eating from the Torah table, but yes, he wasn't lucky enough to also be very wealthy. And that happens. And that's not something to truly weep over, because after all, you're still eating from the better of the two tables when it comes to the totality of yourself. Third option, if over children, meaning who have died, meaning that's why you're crying, well, this is the bone of my 10th son. You may remember from our discussion of Rabbi Yochanan earlier, when we were asking whether or not the loss of a child could ever be considered a form of Isurim Ahava. Here we are seeing Rabbi Yochanan again reflecting on the loss of his many children, in fact, 10, and saying that, yes, you can cry. We'll talk about mourning in one of our future classes, but there is a limit. There is a point at which the tears can become self-destructive. And I, who have lost 10 children, am in a position to be able to talk to you, to sympathize, and to help you stand up in this process. Now, Rabbi Yochanan has given 3 different possible reasons, and he's ruled all 3 of those out, saying that wouldn't be a legitimate reason to cry. Now, on the one hand, he is trying to make Rabbi Elazar feel better. He is trying to say, don't worry about it. This is what happens. Here's sympathy. Here's someone who understands. It seems quite nice. On the other hand, he has kind of tripped on one of our basic rules, which is he didn't listen to Rabbi Elazar first, and instead opened his own mouth to give his own interpretations first. And as we've talked about, the first rule is to listen to the other person. And that's going to come back to bite Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Elazar finally speaks and says to Rabbi Yochanan, I am crying over this beauty of yours that will decompose in the earth. So why is Rabbi Elazar sick at home? Well, he is essentially in a point of existential malaise or depression. He is realizing that even something as beautiful as Rabbi Yochanan, his teacher, will eventually be buried in the dirt. And that is driven him to this point of dark reflection, of being locked in a room. He is very much exhibiting the classical signs of depression. And his depression is this reflection upon not only mortality, and not just his mortality, but the mortality of everything that is beautiful in the world, that this will all one day be dust. And that is what has driven him to this point. Now, notice first and foremost that the Talmud is recognizing that this type of illness, this depression, is indeed an illness. It deserves a visit, it deserves attention, it deserves support. It is not all in your mind, to use the terrible language that many people have in the modern world, that this is instead just like any other illness that we might think of, and as such deserves the same compassion and the same care. And let's see Rabbi Yochanan's response to the revelation that Rabbi Elazar is crying because he has been dwelling on the mortality of Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yochanan's beauty. Rabbi Yochanan said to him, over this, it is certainly appropriate to weep. So Rabbi Yochanan almost gets caught up in this because both of them begin to cry. And it is essentially that Rabbi Yochanan is taken aback, but he does acknowledge that, yes, the pain of mortality is indeed something that can move us to tears from time to time. But meanwhile, Rabbi Yochanan said to him, is your suffering dear to you? Rabbi Elazar said to him, I welcome neither the suffering nor its reward. Rabbi Yochanan said to him, give me your hand. Rabbi Elazar gave him his hand, and Rabbi Yochanan stood him up. In the end, they are both pulled out of this darkness, and they go back to being well again. It is a very poignant and dare I say it, slightly humorous episode. I know it's hard to find a humorous episode in a study of suffering, but Rabbi Yochanan going, are you upset about this? A, B, C, and then it turns out, no, I'm upset that you, Mr. Beautiful, are going to die. I have to believe the rabbis understood that there was just a little bit of wit in that response, while also simultaneously recognizing the real pain that comes sometimes from our contemplation of mortality, and that together we can lament the loss of this physical life, but we also can lift each other up and go on to enjoy the beauty of this world as much as we can. All right, so with that, we are now going to jump into another anecdote. And this one is going to break all the rules, apparently. But as always, we're going to see that it fits into a special case. The Talmud is very, very famous for its special cases. The Gemara relates another story regarding acknowledgement of the justice of the divine punishment. 400 barrels of Rav Huna's wine fermented and turned to vinegar, causing him great financial loss. So Rav Huna has a huge amount of wine, and the wine goes off. It turns into vinegar. And that means that all the money he spent on that wine is gone. It's a loss. He's going to have to just lose the value of all that wine. So Rav Yehuda, the brother of Rav Salah the pious, along with the sages, and some say Rav Ada bar Ahava, along with the sages, entered to visit him. There's often conflicting narratives of who was actually there. We record both versions, and we can talk about why another time. But it's important to always keep all the information we can. So they came to visit him, and they said, the master should examine his actions. Rav Huna said to them, quite legitimately, am I a suspect in your eyes? They said to him, is the Holy One, blessed be he, suspect that he exacts punishment without justice? Now, that's breaking all of our rules. We were told you don't go like Job's friends and blame the person who's suffering. We don't say, well, if you didn't do anything wrong, God wouldn't have caused this to happen, because we know from the story of Job and from the previous anecdotes just on this very page that people often are suffering and they don't have they're not being legitimately punished for to cause that suffering, and so to heal them, to assist them, to help alleviate their suffering is morally required. And here they're showing up and saying, well, maybe you did something wrong. In fact, you must have done something wrong. Now, the Tosafot, as seen in the little in the lighter text here, do come with a interpretation that helps us understand this, which is to say that the sages knew there is a problem. Now, we can understand that they know there's a problem because of what comes next. We can also see that there is a very midah kineged midah, a tit for tat type of element to this punishment, as it's going to involve the vines. So it's entirely understandable that in this kind of circumstance, where the suffering is financial and where the suffering is very clearly attributable to a particular problem that somebody has committed, that sometimes we do need to help a person move along in their reflection to get past their bitterness or their anger, and recognize that maybe there is an underlying flaw in what they've been doing that could be a connection to what they are now suffering. To give a more contemporary example, if somebody was spending all their time hanging out at nightclubs and their spouse was threatening to leave them, and they were yelling at their friends of how unfair that was, well, a good friend would probably say, maybe you should spend more time at home, or at least spend time with your spouse. Maybe there is a legitimate grievance they have that could be addressed, and then this problem might begin to fix itself. That sometimes we are, in very, very obvious cases, allowed to nudge a person towards the right understanding of what could be causing the problem that they're now experiencing. So let's look at what that problem is, and then we'll decide whether or not the sages were jumping the gun or not. Rav Huna said to them, if someone has heard something improper that I have done, let him say so. So they're like, wait, okay, hold on. If you've heard something, if you think there's something I've done wrong, because why else would you be saying this, then tell me. And that's an important element as well. Rav Huna knows they would never just show up and carte blanche say, you must have done something to deserve this, because the book of Job put that idea to bed. So if they've said that, a light goes off in his mind. They've heard something. They know something that I've done that is wrong, that I guess I haven't considered to be a problem, but they do. And maybe I should listen to them. So he is showing remarkable openness to understanding his own mistake, and that's going to help him. They said to him, we have heard that the master does not give a share of his grapevines to his tenant farmer. All right, so tenant farming has many, many rules in the classical legal system, halakha. The one that's most relevant here is in the small text. A tenant farmer is entitled to a portion of the crop grown on his landlord's property, as well as a share of the vines planted during a given year. So this was one of the normal stipulations of the proper landlord and tenant relationship. Now, it seems that Rav Huna has not been giving the share of the vines to the farmer. And Rav Huna says to them, does this tenant leave me anything for the produce that he grows on my property? He steals it all. So Rav Huna doesn't deny that he's been doing this, but he is essentially saying, I chose not to give him the proper share of the vines because he was not giving me the proper share of the other produce that he was growing, which is my due as the landlord. They said to him, that is the meaning of the folk saying, one who steals from a thief has a taste of theft. Despite the fact that the property was stolen to begin with, one nevertheless engages in theft. Although he did not violate the prohibition per se, it is still a form of theft. It's on the edge of theft, and one who is held to a higher standard than others, like, for example, a rabbi, will be punished for it. So what they are trying to say is, look, if he is not properly paying as a tenant farmer, then there are legal ways to take him to court and have the case be heard and to work out a proper resolution. Just failing to do your part of the deal doesn't actually work. You can't choose to just withhold, especially when you are a rabbi, when you are in a position of more responsibility. You will be held to a higher standard, and as such, even if the overall court, especially the capital J judge, would be more lenient with the average person, God is not going to be lenient with somebody that is charged with teaching the law if that person is pushing the envelope on what the law should be. So, yeah, you messed up. And no, it's not the worst crime ever. You're not, doing the most horrible thing that anyone's ever done. And yes, the tenants are also wrong. And in many ways, they might be even more, in terms of monetary value, might be violating a higher amount of the contract between the two of you. But you are still wrong. And as such, since you withheld the grapevines, your wine, which comes from the vine, was targeted as this form of punishment. And Rav Huna says, I accept upon myself to give my tenant farmer his portion in the future. He basically says, I was wrong. I'll fix this. I'm not going to do this again. You're right. Now, that is an incredible sign for him, especially in our modern world where no one ever wants to admit they're wrong. But he is rewarded for that. Some say his vinegar turned back to wine, and some say the price of vinegar rose and it was sold at the price of wine. So there's two different traditions of what happened, but both of them agree that his financial loss was reversed, that he did not lose out on the value of the wine, and that in the end he was made whole because he acknowledged that he had to do the right thing, even while the other person wasn't. Now, this is just a brilliant episode because it highlights that oftentimes our suffering can be caused by our own behaviors, but how we approach a person who is in that position is critical. We don't just sit back on the sidelines and tut, 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 and we don't only give unreserved support for everything somebody is doing if we know that there is a problem, that we do have to sometimes walk a line between supporting a person who is going through trouble while also drawing their attention to what might be the cause of that trouble. And if they have the ability to change that, then, well, they'll have the ability to change their fortunes. Notice here, the rabbis are not saying, is your suffering dear to you? Because this is definitely not Isurim Ahava. This is something that is suffering that has come because of his misconduct. And as such, the rabbis are still being sympathetic. They are still being supportive. They are still being helpful. They are still visiting him. It's not like they're saying, oh, we can't go see him. He's a sinner. They are there because they want him to be better. They want him to be whole. They want his suffering to end. They're not gleefully enjoying his punishment, even if it was deserved. That's not the point. The point is to make things right. And they are able to accomplish that. And Rav Huna is able to accomplish that. And his problem goes away. All right. If there are no questions or comments, and I don't see anybody jumping for the mic, let's go ahead and begin our next section. We'll see how far we can get through this. So in all of this discussion about right and wrong, a little bit later in the Talmud on 7a, there is a discussion of whether we'll really always understand this. We've talked about the internal side of the suffering of, why am I suffering? Is it because of dereliction? Is it because of sins? Is it because of love? All of those types of things. We've talked a little bit so far about how we will reach out to people who are suffering. Much more of that later. Not today, later, I don't think, but later. But now we need to go big picture. We need to get the map. Help us understand, the Talmud is saying, why these things happen. And the answer to one of the ultimate questions. So they are going to use Moses as the vehicle for this discussion. And I don't know how far we're going to get, but I'll warn you all now. The answer is going to change section by section. So you'll see a little chart here on the first page, but that is not our final version. So if you don't like that chart, or if you do like that chart, don't get attached to it. But we need to take this step by step to follow their thought process, or more importantly, to follow their teaching process. As the Talmud was laid out and edited, they could have jumped to the conclusion that we'll get to, but they thought it was important for us to go through the steps. So here we go. Moses requested that the ways in which God conducts the world be revealed to him, and he granted it to him, meaning God granted this request to Moses. As it is stated, show me your ways and I will know you. So the rabbis are understanding your ways to mean something very particular. What? Moses said before God, Master of the universe, why is it that the righteous prosper, the righteous suffer, the wicked prosper, the wicked suffer? Basically, the question that we've been wrestling with since we hit Job in particular, but was also touched on in Ecclesiastes, which is good people have good things and they have bad things, and bad people have good things and bad things. That doesn't seem fair. That doesn't seem right. That doesn't seem just. It just doesn't make sense. It's supposed to be that if you do good, good things happen, and if you do bad, bad things happen. And that doesn't seem to work. So could you explain it to me, God? What is your way in this matter? Okay. God said to him, this is version 1, again, version 1. Moses, the righteous person who prospers is a righteous person, the son of a righteous person, who is therefore rewarded for the actions of his ancestors. The righteous person who suffers is a righteous person, the son of a wicked person, who is then punished for the transgressions of his ancestors. The wicked person who prospers is a wicked person, the son of a righteous person, who is rewarded for the actions of his ancestors. And the wicked person who suffers is a wicked person, the son of a wicked person, who is punished for the transgressions of his ancestors. All right, good. We can go home. Wow. Very simple. It's, A plus B equals C. It's you plus your ancestors, and we're good to go. We can solve this, go home, no theological problems whatsoever. If I see somebody who is prospering, I will know they were a good person who had good parents, or they were a bad person who had good parents. Well, if I see somebody suffering, then I'll know that they are a bad person with bad parents, or a good person with bad parents. This doesn't actually help, because we've taken the experiences of the world, which we see, bad stuff happening, good stuff happening, and we divided it into 4 different categories, but 2 of them are identical, even though the people that it's happening to are completely different. So how do I understand? I still would be incapable of looking at the world, examining the world, and understanding God's ways. That this leaves me just as confused as righteous people suffering, prospering. It doesn't really clarify anything, because it, first of all, hasn't told me how to identify who's righteous, and it hasn't told me to identify whether the prospering of any individual person is because of their righteousness or because of their wickedness. But they happen to both share good parents. So am I any better off with this idea? Well, the rabbis didn't think so because they came up with a separate version. The Gemara expands upon these righteous and wicked individuals. All right, hold on. Is that really the case? The master said, the righteous person who prospers is a righteous person, the son of a righteous person. That's what we just tried to talk about. The righteous person who suffers is a righteous person, the son of a wicked person, like we just saw. The Gemara asked, is it so? Like, wait a minute, really? Just like hopefully all of us were asking, is that actually how this works? Now, when they use this type of retort within rabbinic literature, it means there is a glaring contradiction or error within this proposition. Because isn't it written, he visits the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, and upon the children's children unto the third and fourth generations, from Exodus 34. And it is written elsewhere, Deuteronomy, fathers shall not die for their children, and children shall not be put to death for the fathers. Every man shall die for his own transgression. The Gemara raises a contradiction between these two verses, right? This doesn't seem to work, but then again, the Torah seems to be mutually contradictory. On the one hand, the Torah says that children do get punished for the mistakes of their parents. And on the other hand, the Torah says that children will not be punished for the mistakes of the parents. So is the Torah schizophrenic here? What's going on? Well, we're going to resolve, and I'm going to say resolve in quotes, because again, just like last page, this is our step 2, but it is not our final step. The Gemara resolves the contradiction. This is not difficult. Whenever it says this is not difficult, it means I'm going to introduce a new element which helps reconcile these two contradictory ideas. This verse from Exodus, which states that God punishes the descendants for the transgressions of their ancestors, refers to a case where they, the children, adopt the actions of their ancestors as their own. And this verse from Deuteronomy, which states that descendants of are not punished for the actions of their ancestors, refers to a case where they do not adopt the actions of the ancestors as their own. As it is stated, I will visit the iniquity of the fathers upon the children and upon the third and fourth generations, but a righteous person is clearly not punished for the transgressions of his ancestors. So what do we get? Well, we get a slightly different chart. If you are a good person who had a good parent, then you are going to prosper because you are continuing in their good ways, and therefore it's fine. And if you are a good person who has a bad parent, well, their sins will not be burdening you. They're not going to be punished for their mistakes because you have rejected the way of their behavior. Likewise, a bad person who does the bad of their parents, well, then of course that will be passed right on to them, and they will be suffering from that. And although it's unclear, it seems to be that you will still receive some benefit if you're bad from the merit of your parents, or maybe not. But it is still a little bit murky. And we are still left wondering whether or not this means we can completely understand the suffering we see around us and the prospering of what we see around us. And that's why we're going to get a third chart. Rather, don't listen to those charts 1 and 2. It must be that God said to Moses as follows: the righteous person who prospers is a completely righteous person whose actions are entirely good and whose reward is entirely good both in this world and the world to come. The righteous person who suffers is one who is not a completely righteous person. Because he does have some transgressions, he is punished in this world, so he will receive a complete reward in the world to come. If you pay off your debt now, you won't have any interest payments later, right? Just you clear the bill now before you move on to Olam Haba, the world to come, and that way the world to come will be 100% reward. The wicked person who prospers is one who is not completely wicked. God rewards him in this world for the good deeds that he performed, so that he will receive only punishment in the world to come. The inverse of the other. Finally, the wicked person who suffers is a completely wicked person. Since he performs absolutely no mitzvot and deserves no reward, he receives only punishment in this world and in the world to come. Okay, so our chart's been put into a few more categories. We've got the 100% good person, and they will always prosper. And we've got the 100% bad people, and they will always suffer. But most of the people in the world, well, most of us are in between. It says a rabbinic dictum that there are very few completely righteous and very few completely prosperous. And therefore, we're back in the same boat because mixed righteous and bad people are still going to suffer and prosper to some degree because they're mixed. And a bad person will likewise be rewarded and also will suffer to some degree because they're mixed. So again, we may understand in the broadest sense of what's going on, but we will never be able, with this kind of rule, to figure out the individual who's standing in front of us, or even ourselves, of where we fall in this chart. So we have to come up with a different conclusion. Rabbi Yochanan's opinion. Remember, Rabbi Yochanan has been dominant throughout all of this, somebody who has suffered greatly through the loss of his children, and someone who has been there along our discussion about suffering, that Moses granted all three of his requests, and that disagrees with that of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir actually doesn't think God gave him all of his requests. Rabbi Meir said two of Moses's requests were granted to him, and one was not granted to him. As it is says, and I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, taken from Exodus 33. In his mercy, God bestows grace upon every person, even though he is not worthy. Similarly said, I will have mercy upon whom I will have mercy, even though he is not worthy. According to Rabbi Meir, the way in which God conducts the world and bestows grace and mercy was not revealed even to Moses. Okay, that's where we're going to leave our Talmud for the moment. We're going to be looking at some other Talmudic sections, but this section is now complete. And what did we end up with? Well, we ended up by saying the same thing we saw at the end of the book of Job. We will never be able to really understand why some things are good for some people and some things are bad for others. That our attempt to put this into a spreadsheet, to run this through a calculator, to be able to perfectly attach the action to effect and the effect backwards to an action is doomed. We are on a fool's errand if we think this will ever be something that we can truly understand. And in the end, that's probably for the best. Because as we saw from our calculation, our spreadsheet version, those little graphs and charts, if we thought we could map this out, if we thought we could always know Mr. Smith is having this problem because he did X, then that would change the way we acted. It would change the way we lived in this world. We would not visit the sick because they deserved it. We would not feed the poor because they deserved it. We would not question the successful because they deserved it. Anybody who was doing well would obviously be one of God's chosen, and anybody who was on hard times was obviously facing the wrath of God, or their parents, or some other math system that we had worked out. Anytime we try to nail this down to the ability to understand, to unravel the complexity and the intricacy of how God is managing these things, is going to result in a complete distortion of human behavior and an attitude that is essentially evil. We see this in modern world when people preach what's known as the prosperity gospel, with the idea that indeed, if you are wealthy, God has blessed you because you are a good person. And if you are poor, you need to work harder and then God will bless you too. What an incredibly poisonous idea to blame those that are in the worst situation, or likewise to reward with praise of their morality people who merely had the good fortune to find wealth. Neither neither situation is something that we can understand with enough certainty to be able to say, I know why this happened. And Rabbi Meir wants us to understand that, even against his good friend Rabbi Yochanan, who was more trying to say that we could understand this. No, we can't, because if we thought we could, we would behave badly. And well, as we're going to see when we get into our discussion next week, how we behave in the face of suffering, whether it is our own or whether it is someone else's, is incredibly important. In fact, it is more important than unpacking the why, because the why will always remain a mystery. The how we respond, on the other hand, that is entirely within our own hands, and something that Judaism has been focused on like a laser for 3,000 years. So we will pick up with that topic of how we respond to suffering, our own and that of someone else's. And we will continue to build off some of the lessons we've already learned, as well as look into some additional insights and techniques which can be applied, very important, not must be applied in different circumstances, for different people, for different benefit. There is no one size fits all. As I said at the beginning of this course many, many weeks ago, you can't just say, oh, I'll remember this phrase and then everything will be fine. It is a lot more complicated than that. In fact, it was so complicated in its totality that Moses himself couldn't understand. But thank God we do know at least many of the ways we can respond. And it is up to us to have the strength and the wisdom to seek out the best solution to different problems, and to do so knowing that we are not subverting God's justice, but instead we are fulfilling God's Torah when we respond to suffering, our own and someone else's, with strength. So with that, I will bid you a good day, and I will see you next week when we get into more of the practical applications. Take care, everyone, and be well.